G'day. Again, today we're talking Ram trucks. I came across this question online the other day and I thought it was a really good question. What do I look for if I'm buying a used Ram? Or this pretty much goes for if you're considering, with maybe a couple of exceptions on mechanical issues or something like that, common problems that might relate to a specific model. But if I'm buying a North American half-ton, three-quarter or full-ton truck in Australia, what should I look for? It's actually quite a good question. Now, most of this information, quite frankly, will relate to buying any commercial vehicle, any car really, in Australia, particularly diesels. But there are a couple of things you want to be aware of that are applicable for buying a North American truck in Australia. Now, as I said, half-ton, three-quarter or full-ton truck, that pretty much equates to, in something like the Ram trucks or the Silverado or the Sierra, a 1500, a 2500 or a 3500. Most of this information is more relatable to the 2500 and 3500, but it does apply to the 1500 to an extent as well. Or in Ford series vehicles, the F150 for sure, a little bit, but more so to the F250 and the F350 series. So if you're buying one of those trucks in Australia, what do I look for? Something worth considering, because the reality is these are specialty vehicles. They just are. They're becoming more frequently seen on the market in Australia, but for now, they will remain a specialty purchase. And when you're buying any sort of specialty vehicle, things are great until they go wrong. So you want to put yourself in the best possible position you can when you're getting into one of these vehicles to make sure the one that you've bought is right for you. So we're going to talk about some general stuff. We'll talk about some stuff that is, pertinent to this vehicle specifically, or this range of vehicle, the Rams specifically. And we'll talk about some things that, you want to consider. We'll start up the front, we'll work our way back. We'll also cover exterior and interior. But the first thing that you want to consider, safe to say, is these things have been converted, with the exception of the 2000 to circa 2005 Ford F series trucks. So that's 250 and 350 that were brought in by Ford Australia. These vehicles, these US trucks have been converted. They've been converted from left-hand drive to right-hand drive. Now, don't take it as a given that if you don't know anything about F trucks and you're buying an F250 or F350 from 2000 to 2005, don't take it for granted that they were a Ford released vehicle. Pop the bonnet and check the compliance plate, because I have seen a number of them, 2000 to 05, that have been imported. Now, that might not be a concern for you if the conversion quality is very good, but you do want to check that out. So do yourself a favor and check that out. But it does make a difference who did the conversion, even up until current. Even if you're buying something that's 12 months old or 2 years old and still under warranty, it does make a difference. You can check online forums and you can have a look at what people are saying, good and bad, about particular conversion houses. You do want to check that out. They're not all built equally. They're not all built equally. And you want to check out that some are accepted as having some things that are common problems that other conversions don't have. Or some people believe that the conversion quality of one vehicle is not as good as another vehicle. So much so that I've seen people go, look, I'm looking for one of these vehicles for sale. For example, I'm looking for a Ram 2500. I will consider anything that people have got for sale from people who have done the conversions from this place and this place. But if it's one of these converted vehicles, I'm not interested. Don't send them to me. I will not buy something that's been converted by that group of people. So you want to be careful. You want to look into that. And maybe we'll do another video another day of the different conversion houses in Australia and what people say about them. But for this point, let's just say, suffice to say, you want to check out who did the conversion. And not just who did the conversion, but what's been converted and how have they done it. That's important, because the steering is an easy one to point out. How have they converted the steering over? Some have just, back in the day, they basically just ran the existing steering design, bring in a new steering column and linkages, and then put a chain from this side of the vehicle to the other side of the vehicle to turn left to right. Steering was sloppy, the drive was less than satisfying, the conversion was probably less than satisfying. Now there's a myriad of different ways that people accomplish the steering conversion from left to right, and you want to check out how that's done. In the case of this vehicle, it's quite a good design, I quite like it, and it retains most of, not all, but most of the factory components. So if I want to change over steering linkages, if I want to change over bushings, I can do so pretty much using all standard left-hand drive parts, apart from basically 3 components, which, you know, this is an old truck now, this is an 05, and a couple of those components, if they were to break, it's unlikely that they would break, but if they did, I would probably have to get them custom made, or go to a conversion house and say, look, can you rebuild me this part? That's the reality, because no one is going to have that part off the shelf. But the good thing is that the majority of the steering components on this truck, the way the conversion's been done, is it's been done in a way that gives me good steering. I'm confident in the design, but it does let me run mostly factory parts, because it is something that I know lots of people who own these trucks and they go and buy a US part thinking, oh, I need to change over something really rudimentary. Might be like sway bar links. I need to change my sway bar links. They buy the US part, bring it in, and then go, oh, actually they've customized the sway bar links to suit their front end design, and now I can't use these parts. So not only have I got to go and get a customized part, or try and find someone who's still got this part on the shelf that I can buy, but now I've got this factory part that I can't use, that I've just paid money to bring it into the country for. Now, in terms of servicing, that's covered in another video that I've done, so I won't be talking about servicing and maintenance in this video. You can check that video out for yourself. But you do want to understand what's been converted. There's some trucks, so in the windscreen wipers here have been moved from how they swing from a left-hand drive oriented vehicle to a right-hand drive oriented vehicle. Some conversion houses didn't do that over the years. They just left the steering wheel, left the windscreen wipers oriented to a left-hand drive driver. Now, if that was me driving it on the right-hand side of the road and the windscreen wipers were favoring my passenger, that would be really annoying. So these are little things that you want to make sure, you want to have a look at how they've done the conversion. How have they brought the steering wheel over to the the right-hand side of the car from the left-hand side of the car. I've seen lots of people who have bought these vehicles. One of the big complaints is if they don't modify the floor pan and they put in a foot park brake, that there's not enough room for your feet with 2 pedals, with a big brake pedal, accelerator, and then a foot handbrake. There's not enough room to have your feet comfortably under the steering wheel while you're driving along, because they haven't modified the floor pan on the right-hand side of the car, and it's a bit squashy. And then you've got this huge wide open space on the left-hand side of the car that you can't use. So these are things you want to have a look at and consider what's been converted, and then what's the quality of the conversion look like. Like, you might get under the car and say, wow, they've butchered this. You want to check that out. How good is the conversion? And then overlay that with feedback from people who actually own vehicles from that conversion house. How happy are they with the conversion? Okay, so starting up the front. Engine. I'll limit this pretty much to diesel, okay? And if you're running a Ram, that means you're going to run a Cummins engine. It won't be a, previously to when Dodge ditched the Dodge name, they're just Ram trucks today. Previously they were Dodge Ram trucks. Whether they're still owned by the same conglomerate, but they run Cummins engines, Cummins diesels. In the petrols, not so, but in the diesels, they run Cummins diesels. This is an inline 6. This is a 5.9 Cummins, as I said, 2005 model truck. It's a common rail, and it has no pollution gear. So no EGR, no DPF, and no DEF. One of the reasons I own it, I don't want any pollution gear, and I don't want to run risks of, being tempted to delete pollution gear and then getting pulled over by the police and getting a huge EPA fine. Don't want that, and I'm no advocate for deleting pollution gear. So this is a 5.9 inline 6 turbo diesel. They're a pretty known thing. They've been around for a long time, the 5.9s. You can research them to the hill. They're pretty reliable. But as with anything, they're reliable if you look after them. And one of the big banes of my existence is people not maintaining their cars. And this seems to be particularly true of engines that are known to be bulletproof, ultra reliable. They're a lot of the time, the engines that people will be happy to skip servicing on, skip maintenance on, because the engine's bulletproof, it'll be all right. So the first thing you would do in assessing a US truck, but it doesn't matter if it's a Ford with the Power Stroke engine. Now the Ford Power Strokes are pretty good. There is one notable exception in there, but you can find that out for yourself. The Duramaxes in the Silverado and Sierra, they're generally okay. Again, there's plenty of information about the pitfalls of them. But the one thing that will kill these engines is not servicing. And if it doesn't kill them, it will certainly shorten their life expectancy. Because all of these trucks, and you know, Ford people will favor Power Stroke, and Chevrolet will favor Chevrolet people will favor the Duramax, and then Ram truck owners will favor the Cummins and say, oh, the Cummins is the best engine, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, no matter any of the engines, if you don't look after them well, they won't go the distance that you're expecting them to. So where you start, if you're assessing a new truck, same with any vehicle, is you actually don't start under the hood, you start in the car. And you want the books. You want to see the service books, and you want the service records. Now, if you go and this is very, very common today, if you go to a dealer or you go to a private owner and you say, oh, can I have your service history? And they go, oh, I've lost the books. So often with I've spoken to many, many people, oh, can I have a look at the books? Oh, I've lost the books. Nobody loses the books. You never lose the books. I've owned dozens of cars, literally dozens of cars over my lifetime. I've never lost a service manual, never. You fill it out, or you take it to the dealer, they fill it out, they put it back in the glove box. You never lose books. If you've lost books, that means you haven't serviced it, in my humble opinion. I might be wrong, but in my humble opinion, if you go and buy a car and they say, oh, I've lost the books, or you go to a dealer and they say, oh, the books didn't come with it, that probably means one of two things. Either the books did come with it and that wasn't filled out, so they tossed them away, or when they bought it at auction and when the private owner took them in, that was incomplete service history or no service history, so they tossed the books away and then sent it into auction. If you get a vehicle that has no books, my advice, my humble advice would be treat the vehicle like it's never been serviced. Literally, never been serviced. Because you don't know how it's been serviced, so you've got to foreshadow the lowest common denominator and figure that this thing's never, ever, ever been serviced. So that means you're going to need to get it very cheaply, extraordinarily cheaply, because you need, in case it hasn't been serviced and the engine is a ticking time bomb, you need to be able to get it cheap enough to replace the mechanicals of the car if something goes wrong. So tread very carefully when there's no books. One of the principal reasons and these are expensive trucks, even used. This is an 05. I bought it last year and it still cost me 40 grand. That's a lot of money, especially for, now, today, it's a 15-year-old car. Last year, a 14-year-old car. But for a 14-year-old car, that's a lot of money. So you want to make sure this thing's been looked after and that you're going to get value and you're not buying somebody else's problem. One of the principal reasons I bought this car was a full service history. I could speak to the previous owner and find out what they did to it and how they maintained it. And that was a big advantage. You're going to throw down big money on one of these things. You want to make sure it's been serviced, because not only could it potentially go wrong for you and cause you misfortune, these are not going to be cheap things to replace, because you're talking specialty people to repair them, even diesel mechanic. Like diesel mechanic could be able to service it, but they've got to bring the parts in from America. They're vehicles they haven't worked on before, probably, unless you go to a specialty place, but a specialty place needs to remunerate its IP that it's generated in looking after these trucks for a long period of time. So it's going to get expensive. So go in and put yourself on the best footing you can. This is where you start. So assuming they either have the books or you've made a determination that you've either got to get this really, really cheap because there's no books, then you can come under the hood. Now, sure, you can pull the dipstick and you can see what the oil level's like. you know, I don't know how, you know, it's amazing sometimes when people are selling a car, how little they will do to present it to you in a good way. I have gone to buy a car and dipped the oil and haven't even been able to find the oil on the dipstick. That was a car that I walked away from rather rapidly because I couldn't get it at a price where I could get it low enough that I could also replace the engine if it went boom, because a car running on no oil, I don't know how long it's run like that for, but suffice to say, that's not good, and it could have been running like that for some time. So you can dip the oil and you can make sure there's a good oil level in it. You know, if the oil is golden, that means like they've probably changed it that morning before you got there, because diesel oil goes black in no time flat. But anyway, you can dip the oil. You can check that. You can check for blow-by. That's a good thing to do. Blow-by, there's plenty of instructions on how to check for blow-by. One of the rudimentary ways, I'm not saying it's the be-all and end-all way to do it, but what you can do is you can take your oil cap off while the engine's have the engine running, then undo the oil cap, careful if it's hot, and put the oil cap down on top, and if it blows it off, probably a fair bit of blow-by. Be careful of that. But the easiest way to me to give yourself an idea of condition of engine, so let's say, you know, this is a check, it's got full service history, beautiful. When you go and look at the truck, you want to go early in the morning when it's cool, and you need to insist that, again, this is common for any car, cold start. Don't start it before I get there. If you start it before I get there, I'm coming back the following day and I want to see a cold start. I'm not willing to buy it until I see it start from cold. It's actually a really, really good way of determining, it's not the be all and end all, don't misunderstand me, but it can really tell you a lot. For example, with one of these vehicles, you could have a leaking pressure relief valve, which means it'll crank and 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 crank, and it'll either won't start or it will take an eternity to start. Or you could have a cracked injector or a leaking injector, and the same thing will happen. Cranker, 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 cranker. And let's say that the dealer that morning started it with a shot of ether, got it warm enough that it'll start first time when you get there, and then you take it home. You don't want to keep chugging ether down the intake, and you're going to have problems. So you want to start it cold, dead cold, not started that day. You also could have a problem that you know, your batteries are on the way out. These things need really, really good batteries and really good charge, or it won't consistently turn it over. These things don't have glow plugs as well. So Cummins engines, this isn't true of the other makes necessarily, but if you're buying a Ram and you're buying a Cummins, they don't have glow plugs. So other diesels in Australia will have glow plugs. This does not. This has a heating element. It's in here, in your intake. You start it, it'll heat the heating element up to heat the air up as it goes into the engine, make it easier to start. They can foul up. They can foul up, can make it harder to start than should. And you'll be able to see that if you start to go cranker, 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 boom. Yeah, it might start fine, might idle fine, might run fine, but that long start indicates something's not right. Shouldn't do that. Should cranker, 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 crank, boom. Or cranker, cranker, boom. Should be very easy to start. If it's very, very hard to start, worth checking out what it is. Because if it's injectors, that's going to get expensive. Like even, you know, this thing's been around for a while. The injectors that are made for this, you're going to have to recore them. So you're going to have to take your injectors out. And if you get someone who can rebuild them for you, then that's fine. Otherwise, you're going to have to send them away and get rebuilt ones back. Or if you buy them new, chances are they're going to want your old ones and you have to send them away and get them back. It's going to be expensive. It's in the thousands and thousands of dollars to get that fixed. So you want to make sure that it's a good starting vehicle. It's not the be all and end all in terms of engine health, but it is a good way to check things out. Okay, behind the engine, you've got a transmission. In this car, it's a 48 RE. It'll be some, you know, it might be an RFE in later models or whatever, but you know, you can option other transmissions in these trucks. The power strokes are different, Duramaxes are different in terms of the transmissions they've got in. Might have an Asen or an Allison or whatever it might be in it, depends on the make. In terms of checking your transmission health, you can certainly pull your transmission dipstick, pull it up, Smell the oil, look at it. Hopefully it's bright red, and hopefully it doesn't smell burnt. If it smells burnt, if it's really scungy, chances are they haven't changed it very regularly or haven't changed it at all, which means you know, these things, the reality is if you own one of these trucks, probably more likely than not, you've bought the thing to pull and pull heavy weights. That's probably why you're looking to buy one of these. And this, regardless of what the previous owner says, oh, you know, well, really just one of the really spacious car, really didn't do much towing with it. Probably not. They've probably done a heap of towing with it. Probably. Not necessarily, but probably. And if the transmission fluid is scungy and they haven't changed it, that could mean that you're going to have a premature death of your transmission. These transmissions in this vehicle, the 48RE, is not sealed for life. It has a service interval. The service interval is in the manual. It will tell you exactly what it is. You need to change the filter, you need to drop the fluid, and you need to adjust the bands. Now, depending on what transmission you've got, will depend on what servicing you have to do to it, but you should service the automatic transmission. If it's not been done, that could get very expensive for you, especially in Australia, where again, you've got a specialty transmission. You're going to have to, a transmission specialist will be able to rebuild it for you, for sure, but they've got to get the parts in. They might not have done it before. It's going to cost you a lot of money to get it repaired. You don't want that cost repair if you can get away with it. So ideally, you will have in here, you'll have it detailed when the transmission was serviced. So it'll say, you know, change transmission filter, adjust bands, tick, sign, stamped. Okay, transmission's been serviced, very, very good. Find out what the interval is, try and find out when it's been serviced. If there's nothing in there about the transmission, if you have access to the original owner, you might be able to talk to them about, have you had the transmission serviced? If they say yes, do you have the receipt? Do you have records on that? Thankfully with this truck, it came with not only the books and everything, but it came with an absolute plethora of receipts on all the work that had been done to it over the years. So I knew that this transmission had been serviced. And when I bought it, one of the things I did was I actually drained the transmission fluid shortly after buying it, and it was crystal clear. So I'd verified everything that was in here. Now, if you've got a Ram, chances are you won't have a drain plug on the automatic transmission pan, so you can't even try and crack the drain plug and try and grab a little bit of the oil, although you can do that from here. So whether you need to do that or not. But regardless, with one of these, without a drain plug, they're a pain in the ass to service. One of the first things I'd recommend is changing that over. But that's a topic for my servicing video. That's in another video. But you want to check out that transmission health. If you've got someone who's done a lot of consistent heavy towing, there might be a transmission temperature gauge on the inside of the car. Whether you take that as a good thing or a bad thing, that's up to you. On one hand, you can say, well, at least they've had a temperature gauge and they can, you know, see how things are running. So maybe if they saw the transmission getting hot, they've backed it off. Or a transmission gauge, you could go, geez, if they put a transmission gauge in here, they must have done an awful lot of towing. So you can take that two ways. I'll leave that up to you to decide. Other mechanical items, you can check your tail shaft, see if there's any residual grease on the grease nipples on it, and that goes up the front on your unis and stuff as well. See that there's any, that's been greased. That's again, some people will look at that, it's a bit of a pain in the ass job, I won't do it. It's not a huge thing to replace a uni, but you don't want that. You certainly don't want to bust a uni while driving down the highway. That's going to be no fun. Hopefully that's been serviced correctly. The differentials, you might find that the books hopefully detail when the differentials were serviced, front, rear, and that includes not only the transmission, which we've just covered, but also the transfer case. If you've got a 4x4, hopefully it details that that's been done. In that case, what you could do, there is a fill point. It's a nut. You can undo it, stick your finger in it and grab the oil, and you can see how dirty it is. If it's black, hasn't been done. If it's scungy and milky and claggy, it's probably had water in it because they've done creek crossings in it and they haven't drained it afterwards, and water's got in the breathers. Hopefully that's not the case, but you can probably get your finger in there or a bit of wire or something just to get the oil. Don't do it while it's running, obviously, and you can check the condition of the oil if you want to do that, if it's not in there. So that should cover your driveline in a rudimentary sense, hopefully. Up the front, usual things, you can check your coolant. Obviously, you don't want any sludge in the coolant. Similarly, underneath the cap, you don't want any sludge under the cap under here, which could indicate that you've got a cracked head. You don't want any oil in there, which could indicate you've got a cracked head. So watch that. But this comes to one of the things. Most of this is generally the case for any vehicle that you're buying. This becomes a little bit more, you want to have a really good look at the front end on one of these. Now you'll do that with pretty much any car you'll buy. You'll have a look at the bushes, have a look at the rubbers, have a look at the CV boots. On one of these, you know, CV boots on one of these, but you got uni joints underneath it. But in any event, if you're buying a US truck, you want to spend some serious time examining the front end. These are heavy trucks, heavy engines, very hard on front suspension and steering. And if you're steering, so this thing here, I bought it with 200,000 Ks, and they just had a complete steering overhaul just before the fella sold it, and including a conversion to the later model steering. So this has the later model Ram steering, the 4th gen truck steering, as opposed to the 3rd gen truck steering, which is really, really good. So that's an upgrade I got for free. Well, not for free, but it was obviously included in the price. I didn't have to do it. But if you've got a truck, and it can happen depending on how rough you're driving. I know people that have gone off-road, done laps of Australia in some pretty rugged territory and have had to do a front end rebuild under 100,000 Ks. I know people that have been pretty light and they've got 200,000 Ks out of it before they've needed to rebuild the front end. But once you know, depending on the driving you've got, but if you're looking at a used one, certainly if it's done over 100,000 Ks, certainly 150,000 to 200. If it's never been done, you're probably up for a front end rebuild in steering and suspension, I would say. But you can soon find that out. It depends on when they last did it, if they've done it at all. You can get under the truck, have a look at the bushes, have a look at the ball joints, have a look at your suspension components. Have they been changed? When they last changed, are the bushes all chopped out? Are the tie rod ends all flogged out? Are the boots cracked? Are they leaking grease? It's not going to be hard to see that. It's not going to be hard to diagnose. You can even jack it up and see if there's any slack in it. You know, turn the steering wheel all the way to full lock 1. Get someone to do that while you have a look under the stand, see if there's any movement in the steering before it takes up. You want that thing to be all moving very snug and very succinctly. You want it nice and tight, that steering. But if you're buying something with 200,000 Ks, 150,000 Ks, chances are you're going to have to rebuild the steering. And if you can't do that yourself, that's going to be thousands and thousands of dollars. Even if you can do it yourself, it's going to be well over $1,000 to do a full front end rebuild, that's for sure. But it's going to be a job in the thousands. And I know I've spoken to people who have bought trucks and they've had to change. They've bought it in Queensland, brought it down to New South Wales to register it, bought it in South Australia, brought it up to Queensland to register it, whatever. Bought it, driven it home, taken it in, they've said, oh, well, your ball joints are shot, your bushing's shot, your shocks are shot, you're going to have to, your torsion bar's shot, you need to replace that. And they're up to thousands after just dropping tens of thousands on the truck. They've got an immediate bill in the thousands before they can even register the truck, and they've got probably a couple of weeks off the road while the mechanic gets all the parts in and fits it for them. You don't want that headache. Front end, you want to really, really spend some time on the front end to make sure that the front end is up to scratch, everything's okay, and you're confident that you can buy it and get on the road and drive, and it's going to pass all your regulatory roadworthy checks and all that sort of thing. So check the front end. The back end, in this one, it's just a leaf back end. So your bushes, you got your shackles, and then your shackle bushes on your leaves. Not super complicated. In this one, this has also had airbags added. It's got, there are shock absorbers back there as well. You check that out, that's fine. While you're back under the back end, while you're checking the rear of the car, have a look for the tow bar. Check the tow bar. With this car, it has the original, when I bought it anyway, it had the original factory light duty tow bar on it, which bears out what the previous owner said. They said, yes, we have pulled around a 3-ton van. That's really the heaviest thing is towed, so we didn't need to put a bigger tow bar on it. But if you have this thumping, great, huge aftermarket tow bar on it, you know they've and if it's all smashed up and it's been belting up to toe ball couplings or whatever. If it comes with a pintle hook attachment or something, it comes with a fifth wheeler, you'll know it's done some pretty heavy work. It's done some pretty heavy towing. So worth knowing, because if the owner's telling you, oh, it's really not towed anything at all, you know, probably towed my 6x Ford trailer around and that's all, then it's got a fifth wheeler in the back, you'll know that's crap. Or if it's got a huge, dirty, great big tow bar on the back that's all been smashed about, the tow bar's all worn, or it's got a pintle hook on it, you'll know that's not true. So have a look under there for that while you're under there. In terms of outside of the Driveline, outside of that, you know, usual stuff, check your panel fit, written off vehicle register. Panel fit will tell you if there's any, you know, been any accidents, if there's gaping panels gap on it, orange peel, you know, and you can say what you want about American truck build quality. I'll leave that for you. But if you find areas of paint that are inconsistent with other areas of paint on the car, chances are it's had an accident and a repair. Now, as to what the repair was will depend on, you know, it depends on where it is and what the repair was as to how serious that is to you, but you want to keep that in mind. Then you move to the interior. So on the in the back of it, you know, you can look at the tub. That'll tell you what sort of loads it's carried. If you've got an absolutely mint condition tub, probably hasn't really done any heavy lifting. If it's got a fairly worn, dented, and the steel sagging in a tub or in a steel tray, it's probably done some heavy work. But then again, these things are built for that, so that may not be a concern to you. It just depends. On the interior, usual stuff. Check your seat trim. You know, if you've got a pop seam on your driver's seat, the person's been getting in and out, you're either going to have to repair that for a roadworthy, or you're going to have to put a car seat cover on it. If the back seat's immaculate, they probably don't have kids. If they've got a well-worn back seat, previous owner probably has kids. You know, they're the usual things you would check. The things you want to check specifically with a Ram is you want to, again, check anything that's been converted. Anything that's been converted. So the seats will have been converted. Especially if the driver's seat and the passenger seat have the same features in electronic movement and in with like heated seats and stuff, they probably haven't been converted. They're probably as they came from factory. So that's nice and easy if you need to repair them, you just order the parts for them. If, as was originally the case with this truck, I've changed the seats over, but originally with this truck, the driver's seat was power and the passenger seat was manual. Now what that means is that if the power switches, if the switches themselves shagged out, then I would need to find somewhere, I either have to find an upper spec model that had the same switches on the driver's seat, so I could just do a complete swap, or if there wasn't an option on this truck that had all that switch gear on the driver's seat, that's a custom part, and I'd have to go and get it custom made. Good example of that will be your windows up and down. So when it came out from factory, your driver's electric windows, you can control all windows from the driver's side, and then every other window you can only move your window up and down. But on the original factory release version, obviously all those switches to control all the windows at once are on the passenger side. They're not on the driver's side. So lazy converters, and I have seen this done once, only once admittedly, but I have seen it done once, they never move them. So if you're on the driver's seat, you can move your window up and down, but if your kids are moving the windows up and down, you can either lock them out or you can't put them up. So those were on the passenger side still, they hadn't moved them. So check that they've been moved for sure, but the other thing is you want to check the condition of those switches, because especially if you're buying an older truck like this is an 05, if all the switches are stuffed and the surround is stuffed, good luck trying to get a replacement, because they were fabricated at the time back in 05, 06, whenever these trucks were built in. They've moved on in generations, they've moved over in interior design since then, and the switch gear is not the same. So you're gonna have to find someone who's willing to custom mold you that part. For mine are okay. My driver's side switches had actually, they had some damage to them, and I was able to repair them and mold them back into them. It all looks fine, all operates fine, looks factory, looks flush, great. But I did actually buy, I found a wrecked one of these and they had a full set of door trims, and I did buy the door trims in case those switches ever go again. I've got a full set of trims if I ever want to put into the car if the switchgear ever lets go. Now in terms of the steering, like the steering wheel, that's going to be pretty fine. You know, that's just standard part. You could get a replacement from the US. The steering column surround, indicator stalk, very, very rare that any of that's moved. Your automatic transmission gear selector, that won't have moved, that's the same. The instrument cluster itself will be the same. Your radio surround will be the same. The dash will be different. So if you bought an old truck that the dash wasn't done particularly well and there was cracks in it or something, chances are you're either going to have to get someone to custom repair that. It's going to be pretty hard to find another one, or just live with it. So, you know, anything that looks like it's been moved from left to right, you want to check that it's in good condition. The other thing you want to check that's in good condition is your wiring. These things have been converted, and a lot of the, where you happen to live, if you buy something that's been converted back in 2010, 2005, whatever, or even 2015, if you're living somewhere where there's not a dealer that actually specializes in that truck and actually complied that truck in the first place, and you have an electrical gremlin, you're going to have to hire an auto electrician to try and track it down. I've seen these things with airbag lights on. I've seen them with the air conditioner that doesn't come on anymore. I've seen the windscreen wipers won't come on automatic. You turn the dial, people lamenting, oh, I turned the dial to turn the windscreen wipers on and they won't turn on. Take it to the auto electrician, they don't want anything to do with it. It's because they've been converted. If anybody out there has dealt with imported vehicles, doesn't matter if it's from Japan or from the United States or wherever, often there's a reluctance when they go really wrong because it can just be a crapshoot as to how we track the problem down. We've got an electrical gremlin in here. We've got no wiring diagram. Even the factory one might give us some clues, but the wiring's been moved from left to right, so nothing's where it was originally, and they've spliced into the loom or they've cut it or whatever they've done. It can make it quite difficult to diagnose problems. So ideally, you want to make sure that you've got no electrical problems, that everything works. So if you're test driving it, test everything, all the electric windows, indicators, windscreen wipers, your water jets, your radio, your fan controls, your air conditioning, even if it's in the middle of winter, everything, interior light, the glove box light, electric seats, heated seats, everything, every switch that you can find, flick it, make sure that it works. Make sure there's no warning lights on. A scan tool is a good thing to go into an inspection with. Plug your scan tool in, have a look at the historic codes. What codes is this thing thrown? And ideally, if you can find out when were they thrown, did the dealer get them, clear them off this morning and send you for a test drive, hoping that the warning light wouldn't come back on again. See what warning codes have been thrown in the past. These are good things to check regarding electrical problems that could save you significant headache. Even if it's not that big a deal in terms of cost to replace it, taking it to someone who's got to try and diagnose it, you've got to find someone who's willing to do it, and then after you find someone who's willing to do it, they've actually got to go through and decipher, how do we track this problem down? So ideally, you don't want to inherit any of those problems going in, or if you do inherit it and you go into it knowingly that you've been able to negotiate it for a price that you're extraordinarily confident that you're going to be able to get that replaced. So that's pretty much it. This is the critical one, obviously. Most of this stuff really is applicable to any vehicle that you'd want to buy. But you are buying a specialty vehicle, so you want to check it thoroughly. You do want to check the front end, check your engine health, and you want to know that if something goes wrong, that you're probably going to be up for a bill that, if all you've owned prior to one of these is a Toyota Corolla, coming into one of these, you're probably going to have a heart attack if you've ever got to pay a repair bill. Or if you're getting it serviced by somebody, you're probably going to have pretty expensive servicing. They're not a bad thing to own. I really like this truck. I enjoy driving it. I enjoy owning it. I enjoy the flexibility that it offers me. I think they're good things in their place. If you're a person who lives in an apartment building in Melbourne and just wants to look cool, I think there's better ways to look cool than driving a Ram if you're living in that environment. Really, I own this because I need the functionality that this provides. In that case, I think they're a very, very good choice. If you don't need that, maybe look elsewhere. But in any event, there's some of the things that you should check, in my opinion, going into one of these. There are a number of people out there that will do that service for you. There's the road agencies in different states, the RAA, the NRMA, RACQ, etc. They can do inspections for you. There's also private firms that you can do, like Red Book Inspect, for example. When I got this thing, when I bought this thing, before I flew over and had a look at it, it was in another state, I did get an inspection service to go and look at it. Maybe I'll do a review of that experience in another video if people are interested in that, because it was a very, very good experience. The person that did it rang me. They asked me what I wanted them to check. I gave them basically this list, and they checked it all and were able to give me a very comprehensive list such that I was confident to fly over and check it. However, and this is pretty critical, if you choose to do that and get someone else to check it for you and they give you a report and you go, yep, that looks good, and then you go over to get it, check it again. Check everything again and make sure that it's right before you drive off the lot. Because maybe that person who did it in good faith didn't check it all, or didn't check it to the standard that you were expecting. So check it out for yourself. I hope this was useful. If you do have a genuine need to buy one of these things, look forward to seeing you out on the road someday if you get one. Thank you for watching.